I can't believe I watched the third episode of A Handmaid's Tale on this week in particular, because this episode feels like the culmination of everything that's been happening in the real world this week. And normally when I do these kind of analysis, I don't cite like specific laws or bills or current events, because I would rather people piece things together on their own. I just generally think that's a better way to go about things, but this week I need to talk about very specific things because very horrifying things have happened this week. And I actually think we're going to look back on this week in particular as a turning point in the United States. We will get into it, but make sure you subscribe if you want more Handmaid's Tale analysis week by week. I am almost at 10,000 followers, so thank you guys so much, and maybe this video will get us across that 10,000 point. But real quick, I need to ask you guys for your help. And I hate to ask for a favor, but one of these favors costs nothing but 30 seconds of your time, so please just hear me out. If you haven't heard, anyone who reserves an early hardcover copy of my family vlogging psych thriller, You Watched in Silence, is going to get a signed book plate and a postcard from the fictional Salmon Island. This is going to go to the first 1,000 people who reserve a copy in either the US or Canada. All you gotta do is go to my you know what and fill out the form after you've reserved your copy. And if only 2% of my viewers every month went and reserved an early copy, you guys would put me straight on the New York Times bestseller list. It is so hard to break out as a debut author, but you guys could change the trajectory of my career forever by reserving an early hardcover copy. I cannot tell you how important it is. Any retailer works, but BNN helps me the most. And you're not going to regret it because AJ Finn, author of The Woman in the Window, has read it. This is what he had to say about it. So if you like unreliable narrators and jaw-dropping endings, you're going to enjoy the book. If you cannot afford it, totally understand. I know times are tight right now, but you can still help me out so much by doing one of two things. You could go over to Goodreads and add it to your TBR. Getting those TBR numbers up really shows retailers' interest in the book. Or if you do want to read it when it comes out, cannot afford to get a copy now, request it from your local library. Give them a call, send them an email, tell them you really want this book. And usually when you request it, they will let you know that they're getting it and you can be the first person to put it on hold. So win-win situation. But I cannot tell you how much your guys' early support means to me. Thank you so much to everyone who has already gotten a copy. First, I'm going to summarize the episode for those of you who don't remember. We start with Offglen being taken by the eyes and June lamenting that she didn't even know her name. And she reflects on how all this happened and says that when they shredded the Constitution, we didn't wake up. But nothing changes instantaneously. Even after they dismantled the Constitution, life largely went on as normal. And it seemed normal for a while until drastic changes started to be made. And we get a flashback scene of June on a run with Moira. June is getting really dirty looks, even though all she's wearing is like normal workout clothes. And they go get a coffee, but June's card declines. And when she asks where the usual barista is, a female barista, the employee tells them to get out and calls them a slur for promiscuous women, which shocks them, but they do leave. And then when June goes to her job as an editor at a publishing house, her boss really regretfully informs all of the women that they are immediately let go, and he has no choice. And all the women are escorted out by a bunch of eyes. When we flash forward, it is lunchtime, and Rita serves June lunch, but with a much more chipper attitude than normal. She even gives her a flower, and June is super confused by what all this means until Rita says she hasn't asked for her sanitary napkins yet, implying that she might be pregnant. And then Serena comes into the room, also super chipper, and she asks June if she would like to go to the Putnams, and June says yes, so they do that. When they arrive, Serena lets June hold the baby, even though another wife asks if that's a good idea, and Serena says, oh yeah, she's done this before. She knows how to do it. And it's like, of course she's done this before. All of the wives know that these handmaids have had babies before. I don't know why they act like they don't know anything about infants. So annoying and infantilizing, like I said in the last episode. It's just especially frustrating because like these handmaids have more hands-on experience with babies than any of the wives do. As June is holding the baby, Naomi complains that Janine bit her. So June goes to visit with Janine, who's in really high spirits, and she says, yes, I did bite her, but guess what? I can do whatever I want because I had a healthy baby, and they treat me like royalty. I can even get ice cream. Do you want some ice cream? And she also says that her commander is in love with her, that they are going to run away together and be their own little family. So it's very clear that the commander is sleeping with her aside from the ceremony. On the way out, Serena asks June about her meeting with Janine and how it went, and June says that she's a little worried that Janine is losing touch, and Serena says that can happen with some of the weaker girls, and what they do together is so horrible, but they must remain strong. And she says she's so grateful to have June, and then she sends June home and decides to stay and help with Naomi a little more. In the car, June tries to talk really casually to Nick. She says, have you seen the Putnam's baby? She's so cute. I love fat babies. He's largely ignoring her, and so she just straight up asks about Offglen. She says, you said she was dangerous, then she was taken. Did he know what was going to happen to her? But all he says really cryptically is that she needs to accept what's going to happen, not be brave. She can't fight this or control this, so just be compliant, basically. And then they pull up and June realizes that an eye and Aunt Lydia are there to interrogate her. This eye asks about Offglen. What kind of things did they talk about? Did she think she was pretty? Did Offglen ever try to touch her? Did they have any kind of relationship? And when she's asked if she knew that she was a gender traitor, June admits that she did. Aunt Lydia asks, so you knew what she was? And June says, well, I knew that she was gay, and she gets shocked for this, and Aunt Lydia says that that thing was an affront to God. And she quotes half a piece of scripture to her, but then June finishes it. It says, bless those who stand for righteousness, as theirs is the kingdom in heaven. She gets brutally hit for this, but then Serena runs out and says she's pregnant, so they leave her alone. And we get another flashback of June and Moira at June's kitchen table, realizing that their bank accounts are all frozen. Moira says they had to do it this way, with the bank accounts and the jobs all on the same day. Otherwise, imagine the planes. What would the airports look like otherwise? And June says they can't do this, but Moira reminds her they absolutely can, because they've been under martial law since the terror attack. And martial law suspends the Constitution. And June says, oh, well, that was about fighting the terrorists. And Moira was like, there were no terrorists. That was always about that. And she's right, because we know in retrospect that there was no terror attack. That was a false flag attack by the sons of Jacob. Luke comes in and June is really upset, saying that he now owns all of her money. And Luke is like, aw, babe, you know I'll take care of you. To which Moira gets really mad and says that's so patronizing. And Luke defends himself and he's like, please tell me what is so wrong about wanting to take care of my wife. And Moira's like, oh, your wife? You don't own her. It's that exact mentality that got us to where we are right now. Luke lets Moira rant and then playfully jokes that he should just go into the kitchen and cut off his man parts, and it lightens the mood, and Moira says, yeah, you should do that. When Moira has to walk home, they realize that the train stations nearby are not working, and so June asks if she would want Luke to walk her, to which she says yes. We get a flash to Emily and her trial for her crime of having a relationship with a Martha. The trial literally only consists of her walking into a room, a man saying what she's done, the judge asking that same man to verify that this is 100% true, and he says, yes, I verify that this is true, to which the judge says, okay, then she's guilty. Emily has no representation. She isn't able to speak. Her lover is sentenced to lose her life, but because Emily is fertile, she is sentenced to some kind of rehabilitation. And we get one of, I think, is the most heart-wrenching scenes in the series, which is where they drive to where her lover is going to pass away, and they can't talk because their mouths are covered, but they hold each other's hands and cry with each other, and then Emily has to watch her pass. Back at June's house, Nick goes into her bedroom with some ice and asks if she's okay, to which she teasingly says, yeah, I'm okay, except for this weird guy that just walked into my bedroom. And Nick says he should have just driven away with her, and then he takes the ice and he places it on her hand and really lets that touch linger for a bit, even though they definitely should not be touching. And finally that night, June gets her period, and the next morning she sees Serena setting up a nursery, and Serena really waxes poetic about how lucky she is to have June, how June is her miracle, and then June tells her, I'm not pregnant. She violently drags June up the stairs, throws her on the floor, and then has that really iconic scene where she screams, do you understand me? Amazing acting from Yvonne. And then the last scene is Emily waking up in the hospital. She's bandaged down there. Aunt Lydia walks in and says this is for her own good. Now she will not want what she cannot have, but she can still get pregnant. And she walks out, and then we get what I think is some of Alexis Bledel's best acting. It's all close-ups of her face, but we see her just go through the gambit of emotions, horror, sadness, shock, rage. And the episode ends with her screaming. Now, before I get into some of the political parallels with this episode and what happened this week, I just want to go over some of the characters' experiences. First with Serena, because she's really showing us this episode the drastic difference in treatment between pregnant handmaids and non-pregnant handmaids, where non-pregnant handmaids are treated like they're not even people, and pregnant handmaids are waited on hand and foot, adored, and it really just solidifies the fact that in Gilead, handmaids are not people. They are just vessels for babies, and if they are currently being a vessel for a baby, they are treated as sacred because the baby is sacred. But if they are not a vessel for a baby, they're nothing. It means they're always nothing, because if you treat women like vessels for babies, you are never treating them like a human being, period, point blank. And even Rita really highlights this a bit, because Rita is usually not that nice to June. Now, I don't think that, like Serena, she doesn't see June as a person. I believe Rita's just upset with where she's at in life, which is very understandable. So she has an attitude a lot of the time, which is fine. Who cares? I know she still sees June as a person and still is concerned for June, because she shows concern for June regardless of her attitude. But the fact that her attitude has changed so drastically because she thinks June is pregnant just goes to show how dire things have gotten, because Rita is not even someone who likes Gilead, who wants to be a part of Gilead. But even she is so ecstatic at the idea of a baby because they are so rare and so precious in this world. Going on to some of the other characters, let's talk about Nick, because his actions now in this episode, I see an entirely new light now that I fully understand who Nick is. And in this new light, I find it very hard to see him as anything other than creepy from the very beginning. First of all, he does a whole lot of centering himself this episode. I mean, June is the one who has been beat, but he walks in and is like, ugh, I should have just driven off with you. It's like he's imagining a situation where he could have been a hero to the object of his affection. He wasn't a hero, and so now he's lamenting it. Like, how is it important for June to know right now how bad you feel because you didn't just drive off? It's like a lot of white knighting behavior going on. A lot of the nice guy behavior that I see from men in the real world who are constantly fantasizing about protecting women and being the hero to women, but in doing so they create a fantasy that centers themselves and takes women's humanity out of the picture, women's experiences out of the picture, women's feelings out of the picture, and it's focusing on them. But what's even worse is the fact that he is so clearly flirting with June while not having any idea of how June actually feels. Like, have you guys thought about this? Have you considered this yet? He has no idea that June likes him. We, the audience, know that June kind of likes him, but he cannot know that because she is in such a precarious situation, a situation where she would not feel comfortable to speak up. Because every man in this society is above her. Who knows how Nick is going to react if she rejects him? And if Nick were to assault her, we already know that in this culture, she would be the one to blame for that. She's so severely oppressed in Gilead that Nick can never know how she actually feels. He just can't know. He cannot know if this is coercion. He cannot know if she's scared. She's never going to speak out. And so consent doesn't exist in this world. You cannot have consent where there is severe power imbalances. So imagine a world where she is not attracted to Nick and he comes into her bedroom with ice and then lingers his touch there. Imagine how scared she would be. Imagine how uncomfortable she would be and not able to say anything. And Nick clearly doesn't care that he would be putting her in this uncomfortable situation. Even worse, he is doing this while she's wounded, while she is actually very injured, after whining about how he wasn't the hero in the situation. I'm sorry, I just see a lot of involuntary celibate behavior from Nick. I cannot unsee it as I'm watching. And I think any man that truly valued and respected women would put his own desires and feelings aside to make sure he's not making any woman stuck in this world uncomfortable. Because like I said, even if he knew that she was really into him, even if he believed that it was consensual, it could never truly be consensual. I think any decent man would know that and wouldn't pursue that. It's just like what's happening with Janine. She technically seems to be consenting to her commander. She's really excited that he is in love with her, when in reality, she's just in a situation where she wants to be mother to her child. She wants to not be a handmaid. She would do anything to make that happen, including running off with the man who has been assaulting her for a year. It's not that Janine actually consents. It's not that she actually loves her commander. She does not have a choice. There's no consent in this world. A better man would realize that power imbalance and back away. I was also really touched by Moira in this episode because I felt her rage was very relatable. Because she is completely right there when she criticizes Luke. And no, Luke is not like an inherently bad guy. Luke is not an inherently sexist guy. Luke does not want to harm women or perpetuate misogyny. But he is perpetuating misogyny without even realizing it because he hasn't fully unpacked patriarchy. He hasn't really put the effort to understand it, which is something that I've noticed with a lot of men, because it takes a lot of effort to actively unlearn some of the toxic mentalities that you live with. And a really common one is this idea that men are protectors. So his first reaction to his wife not having access to her own money isn't, that's horrific, you are your own person, you need access to your own money. It's, oh, I'll take care of you, babe. Granted, that's all he can do in this situation. I'm not saying that he shouldn't reassure her in some way. I'm just saying he went immediately to let me protect my wife. And Moira is right. She is her own person. She's not just your wife. She doesn't need your protection. And even if Luke is well-meaning, just this like centralized idea of like man protector, it puts women in a position to be a second-class citizen, the person that needs protection. And maybe Luke is not the person who should be getting all her rage right now. She's obviously mad about a much larger problem. She's not wrong that like this really casual form of sexism did help the sons of Jacob get to the point that they were. It's just the way that we have all absorbed in our minds that women are second-class citizens without even recognizing that that's what it is. And some people might think it's ironic that at the end of the day, Moira still needed Luke's protection. She still needed him to walk out with her. But what did Moira need protecting from? Because I think this is just exemplary of how suffocating it feels to be a woman. Because Moira doesn't need protection from other women, right? She's not walking around afraid of other women. What does she need protection from? Wildlife? And I can already see some of these comments coming, being like, well, she doesn't need protection from wildlife because she lives in a city, but if it was back in the hunter-gatherer days, yeah, she would need protection from wildlife. That's what men did. That's why men are protectors. This is in our blood. Blah, 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 blah. I just want to point out real quick, that is not true. This idea that men were hunters and women were gatherers was an idea that came from male scientists with their very male bias. And we have recently, in the last few years, learned that no, women were absolutely hunters. We have found women buried with their hunting tools. Women hunted too. Women protected themselves from predators, which is something that makes sense because it's not as if men were like actively fighting these predators with their bare hands. Most predators were much larger than us. We were using tools. We were using our stamina because we have much more stamina than most predators. And there's no reason that women couldn't be using these tools and their stamina to outsmart predatory animals. Just like female animals hunt in the animal kingdom. This is not new. We have no scientific basis to say that men are just natural protectors. So who does Moira need protection from? Moira needs protection from other men because other men believe that it is within their right to harm Moira. This is violence perpetuated by one side of the population. And you cannot say that men are natural protectors and in the same breath that they are who men are protecting women from, other men. Do you see how that's nonsense? Do you see how that's circular? Do you see how women would not need any protector if men would just leave women alone? I also really want to talk about Aunt Lydia's scenes in this episode because she highlights something that is so important for fascist regimes. So important. And that is how necessary it is to dehumanize a group of people and the ways in which we dehumanize them. And a lot of it comes through from our language, even when we are not noticing it. Because if you were watching this episode and you were like, June getting shocked for saying the word gay seems like an overreaction, like it's just a word. This is what you need to understand about why it was so important to not use the word gay. Because the word gay is in itself humanizing. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just a descriptor of a person, right? A person is gay. It doesn't define their humanity. It doesn't define their personality. It is just a trait about them. So let's compare that to the word gender traitor, which is identity first language, right? Gender traitor is not just a description of a person. It is the person. It is central to their identity. They are a traitor to their gender. That is who they are. Takes all the other aspects of their personality out of it. Nothing else matters. They're a gender traitor. It's also why Gilead uses the term unwoman. It's deeply dehumanizing to say you're not even a woman. You're not even your gender. You're not even a person. You're an unwoman. And we can see the intention of this language to dehumanize by the way that Aunt Lydia says that that thing is an abomination. That thing, not a person. Emily's not a person anymore. She is a gender traitor. She is a thing. But why is this dehumanization so important that June gets hit for it? It's because you really need to see a group of people as not human in order to do the things that Gilead was doing to them, right? You cannot see someone as a person and harm them in the way that they were harming women in Gilead. You've got to suck that humanity out of them and make them the scapegoat, make them the reason why society is the way it is, make them the source of all of society's problems, and have that scapegoat to point to in order to rise to power. And you may think we don't have words like that in our culture, but we absolutely do. We have both historical references to this kind of language, but very much references in our modern day. And if you're paying attention to it, especially if you are paying attention to marginalized groups, to those scapegoat groups, you will start to notice very quickly how language is very purposefully curated. Like right now, you will virtually never hear the Israeli government refer to Palestinians as Palestinians. First, what they're going to do is focus the language around Hamas and terrorism. They're going to say they have to fight Hamas, they're going to fight terrorists, they're going to completely ignore the innocent portion of the Palestinian population. Because if they don't mention that innocent portion and they only talk about Hamas every time they talk about Palestine, you will get it in your head that most Palestinians are Hamas, most Palestinians are terrorists, even though that's impossible. Because 41% of the Palestinian population are children. It's a very, very high percentage of Palestinians that are kids. So unless you believe that kids are terrorists, we obviously know that that's not true. You're also never going to hear the Israeli government talk about the very high percentage of Palestinians that are kids. So what do they do when they have to talk about this innocent population? How do they refer to them? Never as Palestinian, because just the word Palestinian ties them to that land, the land of Palestine. So they will call them Arab, or they will call them Israeli Arab, because that takes away their identity to the land and specifically solidifies Israel's identity to the land. They are Israeli Arabs, even though their presence in Palestine came long before Israel became a state. The term Israeli Arabs for them really makes no sense, but they'll use any language that they can to not remind you that this is their land. And if you're like, okay, well fine, maybe Israel is carefully curating their language, but we're not doing that in the US, I promise you that we are. And let me see if you can figure it out on your own first. Let's go through the steps that I told you need to take. Let's look at the scapegoat populations, okay? There is one population right now that is being scapegoated far, far above any other population, right? Like, I'm not saying our current administration isn't attacking a lot of groups, they are, but there's one in particular that's getting a lot of focus. Only one group that is having detention camps built for them right now. Only one group that has an entire police force that is focused on only getting them. And in fact, with the passing of the recent big bad bill, that police force, ICE, is now the largest federal police force in all of the United States. You heard me right. They have a larger budget than any other police force in the US combined. So the FBI, the DEA, the Bureau of Federal Prisons, the US Marshals, if you combine all of those budgets, ICE has a larger one. All to get one group of people. A group of people, by the way, that is only 3% of the population. And what do we call those people, or what does the administration call those people? Illegals. Not even illegal immigrant, just illegals. What does that imply when you call somebody an illegal? It's that their entire personhood is their illegal act, that their very existence is illegal. which isn't true. It's not even a term that is based in any kind of reality. Because while yes, you can cross the border in an illegal way, the vast majority of undocumented immigrants did not cross the border in an illegal way. They came over legally and they simply overstayed their visa. And overstaying your visa is not illegal, it is a civil infraction. Now, do we call people illegals because they've gotten a traffic ticket? I have gotten like 7 civil infractions driving. But if you asked me if I am a criminal, I would obviously say no. But regardless, this language is curated to create an image, because if we use the term undocumented immigrant, that really doesn't have the same punch, does it? Because you're likely to see somebody who is undocumented as still a person, right? They're just a person who doesn't have all their documentation. That doesn't really sound as bad as illegal, because the very word illegal has connotations in our mind. What we first think of is things like theft, violent crime. So not only are you taking the personhood out of the language, you are instituting a word that immediately makes people think of horrible things and associate this group of people with doing horrible crimes, even though the vast majority of them, their biggest crime is not having documentation. But what do we do with those violent criminals that we think of? We lock them away, and we're happy to lock them away, right? We are happy to put a violent offender behind bars. And so if you create a situation where you're calling an entire population illegal, you are justifying your citizens to say, hey, yeah, put those illegals in prison. That's where illegal people belong. And I just also have to say that this entire conversation about undocumented immigration is ignoring the fact that ICE very much has, in many instances now, collected people who are not only documented, are not only staying on legal visas, but even United States citizens have been taken into ICE custody. And that this administration claims that they want people to come here legally, but they are actively stripping people of these visas, and they are sending ICE to the courts to abduct people who are just arriving for their court date because they are trying to get documented. But if you call them illegals, then you can justify putting them in a place called Alligator Alcatraz, where nobody leaves. And you can do it without a trial too, because who cares? They aren't citizens anyway. Which brings me to June's point in this episode that when they shredded the Constitution, she and the rest of the US did not pay attention. That line really hits me, and I just especially want to remind people of the context of what that means in the Handmaid's Tale world, because they suspended the Constitution and then life went on. It went on as normal. People went to their jobs. Nothing felt different immediately after the Constitution was suspended, because like June says, nothing happens instantaneously. And if it did happen instantaneously, if you threw a frog in a pot of boiling water, it would immediately jump out of the pot. But if you put it in cold water and just turned the heat up slowly, it would boil before it even notices. And that's such an important point, because it takes time to take away your rights. It takes time to set up the framework to take away your rights. And fascist regimes tend to roll this out a little more slowly, so you will accept each increasing step. Because, oh, they took away this right, but my life didn't change, so when they take away the next right and my life doesn't change, I'm not going to pay attention then either, and I'm just going to let them continue to strip my rights down. And maybe stripping your rights down, stripping the Constitution down, looks like an administration saying, hey, birthright citizenship is enshrined in the Constitution, but we're going to challenge it. We're going to take it to the Supreme Court. And you're going to think, oh, well, that doesn't change my life if they change birthright citizenship, because I'm already a citizen here. What do I care? But then they're going to talk about stripping citizenship for people who are naturalized citizens and taking away their citizenship if they commit certain crimes. And you're going to think, oh, well, I'm not naturalized, so I don't care. And maybe they continue and they say, no, even citizens, we're going to strip away your citizenship if you commit certain crimes. And you're still going to think, hey, I'm not a criminal. What do I care? If you want your citizenship, follow the law. And then if they start deporting those people without citizenship to countries where they don't belong, which, by the way, SCOTUS recently said, yes, you can deport people to a country that they're not from, that they've never been from. That's legal now. And this is the way that they start setting up these frameworks in ways that you don't care about. You don't care about those people that are being deported to a country that they're not from. It doesn't impact you until it does. Because you may not have been a criminal when they said they were going to start deporting criminals, but then one day, the very normal things that you do in your life are criminalized. Suddenly, you are a criminal because your government says you're a criminal, and now they can do to you what they did to all those criminals you didn't care about. It's way too late to fight them on it because you co-signed it by not caring, by not doing anything. After we get the flashbacks of the women's bank accounts being frozen and them losing their jobs, and Moira says, they had to do it this way. They had to do the jobs and the bank accounts all together, or imagine the airports otherwise. She is entirely right, because if you start instituting these changes too quick and people start fleeing your country, then your population collapses, your society collapses. You need to let people feel like things are normal until they are not, until all the frameworks are set up so that they cannot just leave. And June is still in denial and is saying they can't do this to us, until Moira reminds her they absolutely can. We are under martial law. We have no constitutional rights, and we didn't do anything about that, and now we are here. June says very naively, well, that was about terrorism. And when Moira points out, there were no terrorists, that was just about getting us to a point where they could strip away all our rights, she is correct. And that is how they strip away your rights, by getting you to focus on the wrong people, on the wrong population, which is why it is so freaking important, you guys, to identify the scapegoats in your culture and defend the scapegoats in your culture, defend their rights, because whatever rights they're trying to take away from those people, they are trying to eventually take away from you. You will lose your rights if one person in your country loses their rights. And that may sound dramatic, but let me explain. Maybe what we do is call an entire portion of the population illegals and then say we don't want illegals to have due process, right? And you're like, okay, I don't want illegals to have due process. No problem. Due process for citizens only, even though the Constitution says due process is for everybody in the country. And there's a reason you get due process if you are in the US, no matter who you are, because if one person doesn't have due process, nobody has due process. And I actually had a thread about this go viral, so maybe you've seen it already somewhere, but it sums it up perfectly. If one person in your country doesn't have due process, neither do you. Because now, if I want you to not have due process, all I need to say is that you're not a citizen. And if you're thinking, oh, well, I can prove it. I've got my passport, I've got my birth certificate. How? How are you going to prove it? I'm an ICE agent. I come into your house. I say you're not a citizen. You say, I've got my passport. I don't care. I don't want to see it. You're not a citizen in my eyes. And they take you. And you're like, no, I can prove it. I can prove it. I will show the judge that I have my passport. No, you won't. You don't have a right to a trial. You don't have a right to due process. You have nobody to prove anything to. Anyone can call you not a citizen and you won't be one, and you can be deported anywhere now. Even if you trust in the system, and I don't think that you should, but let's say you do trust in the system and you're like, well, they won't just start deporting United States citizens. What if your neighbor is an ICE agent and they've got a vendetta against you? They hate your yappy dog. You guys have been fighting about it for years, and he realizes he can get rid of you and your yappy dog by just saying you're not a citizen and taking you out of here. You do believe that there can be one bad actor in a police force, right? There's always an opportunity for one bad actor. So if there's one bad actor in ICE, that bad actor can take away your due process. Is that really a system that you want? Do you want to trust every single person in a police force in order to believe that your rights are safe? I don't think any of us are that trusting. And I've said this before, but immigrants are not damaging our economy, and they're not impeding on your right to live in any way. They're not a significant portion of the population, and we have the studies that show that their economic impact on the United States is largely positive. So I have to ask myself why an entire political party would focus on these people unless they were trying to achieve something else. Why villainize this disenfranchised group? Why say that if we get rid of this disenfranchised group, we will make our country better? There's no reason to say that. We don't have the facts to back that up. So the only reason to attack these people is if you have ulterior motives. And if you are willing to let any group's rights disappear, you are handing over your own rights in a handbasket. You are saying, please, Take away my rights too. I don't care about them. And the one thing that is most central to you having rights is our court system. And that is very much shown in Emily's flashback, which is why I want to bring up the recent SCOTUS ruling that says that federal judges can no longer issue nationwide injunctions. They can only order injunctions for the people who brought a case forward. And if that's confusing, just let me explain it. What this basically means is, say the president says that birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. And so California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, all the blue states come together with their attorney generals and they bring this case forward and they say, we think it's constitutional because it's in the Constitution. And a judge says, you're right, it is constitutional. That judge can no longer say it's constitutional for the entire nation anymore. They can only say it's constitutional for the states that brought it forward. So that means that they would create an injunction just for those states, and the right of birthright citizenship would remain in just those states. It would not exist in the red states that did not bring it forward. So if you live in a red state that really co-signs this administration and is not going to argue with them, you are going to lose a significant portion of your rights. They're not going to bring your case forward. You no longer will have the same rights as somebody in a blue state. And not only is that chaos, not only is that a divided United States, I don't know how you can even call it the United States anymore if we do not have federal rules that apply to everybody. It also just means that you are very much more at risk now if you are in a red state thanks to that SCOTUS ruling. And your life is going to feel normal for a very long time, remember, until it just doesn't, because you don't have rights that were very important to you. This is probably the most horrifying SCOTUS decision under this administration to date, because it is literally the courts handing over some of their rights to check the executive branch. They are willingly giving away power from themselves, and they are impeding upon the idea of 3 co-equal branches of government, because it seems that the executive branch is just leeching more and more power that they have never had before. And the scene with Emily just highlights how scary it is to not have a court system that stands on its own. Emily has no lawyer. Emily doesn't even have the right to speak at her own trial. Any man can accuse her of something and then say with conviction it's 100% true, and Emily's guilty. She has no rights. You have no rights without a court system that is functioning. And it really seems that our court system, the integrity of our court system, is being undermined with these new SCOTUS decisions, with the administration actively arguing against Supreme Court decisions when they don't agree with it. And the courts are not doing anything to fight back against that. It is so deeply alarming that it's hard to put into words. And I wish I had a happier note to end this video on, but I don't. It has not been a very happy week. It's been a very scary week, and I think I would be remiss if I was not honest about that with you guys. All I can really say is, please protect the vulnerable, protect the scapegoats in your society. Understand that your rights are everyone's rights, and you need to defend everyone's rights or you'll lose yours. Again, make sure if you want more of these weekly Handmaid's Tale analysis that you subscribe. And if you do reserve a hardcover copy of my book, do not forget to fill out the form in the you know what, or else you will not get your postcard and your signed book plate.